What's up, Brew Crew? Opie here. Welcome back to my Brew City Garden. So it's Memorial Day weekend. We're about 10 days past our average last frost date for the year. And can you guess what time it is? That's right, it's tomato time. It's finally that time of year. The weather has started to cooperate. We're about 10 days past our average last frost date. And by all accounts, this is the time to get my warm weather crops either transplanted out into the garden, or the warm weather seeds can start being sown out in the garden. There's a few seeds I'm going to wait on, probably another week or two, just to make sure that the soil's warm enough. And those seeds will be like beans and corn, stuff like that. But everything else can pretty much go in the garden now. I checked the extended forecast just to make sure it's not going to get too nasty for my warm weather crops like tomatoes and peppers. And even though it's going to get a little bit cool during the nights, it's pretty much going to be okay. So I'm going to go ahead and transplant some tomatoes out here, and I want to show you guys just how I do it. That way there's no question when it's time to put tomatoes in your bales, you know exactly how to put them in. So let's talk a little bit about putting tomato plants in your straw bale garden. Now, your typical bale is going to be about 18 inches wide by approximately 36 inches long. Again, that's typical. Some bales are going to be different, and even some bales from the same source are going to vary in size slightly, but that's pretty much the general range for a small square bale. Now, with that being said, I typically plant indeterminate tomatoes. They just seem to produce better and longer throughout the season. So with it being indeterminate tomatoes, you can plant 2 tomato plants per bale comfortably. Now, if you decided to grow determinate tomatoes, which are tomatoes that just grow up and they put fruit on all in one shot and ripen all in one shot, you could probably get away with putting in 3 plants, because typically those plants don't get very large. Now, if you don't mind doing a lot of pruning, you could put 3 indeterminate tomato plants per bale, but you're really going to have to trim them down to 1 or no more than 2 stems apiece. Now, if you decide to use the dwarf tomatoes, like the Tiny Tims or something like that, you could actually get away with putting 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 of those in a bale. But typically those tend to do better in like a small planter or something like that. So I just reserve my bales for large indeterminate tomato plants, and I put 2 plants per bale, and I do some minimal pruning, and I usually get just an incredible harvest. So it works out really well. And you know what, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So we're just going to stick to that. I've got several varieties of tomatoes going in this year, and I'll do a quick rundown, a list of the ones that I'm growing later in the video. But for now, what I want to show you is exactly how I put these plants into the bales. So if we look at these tomato plants, and all tomatoes are the same way, you can see that there's quite a bit of, there's these little hairs along the stems. And believe it or not, every one of those hairs, if they come in contact with the soil, those will actually develop into roots. So when they tell you to plant your tomatoes deep, that's the reason why, because you could plant this tomato all the way to the tip, and this whole stem would actually root into the soil, and you would end up with a much stronger plant in the end. So what I'm going to do with these plants is just pluck these bottom leaves off, because these are going to be going into the soil, and I want this whole stem to develop roots. The leaves are not needed. And I'm just going to leave the last couple of leaf stems at the top, and the rest of this will go down into the bale. I will do that with this plant as well. Again, as you can see, these tiny hairs will become roots. once they touch the soil. So we'll just get rid of these small leaf stems. Just pluck them right off. It's not going to hurt anything. And I'll just leave probably the last two leaf stems or nodes at the top. And that'll work out just fine. So now what I want to do is clear some room. Give myself a little bit of space to work here. I'm going to move my irrigation line out of the way. Just a little bit. And I want to gently squeeze the pot to release the tomato plant. Now these roots look perfect. It's not root bound whatsoever. Just really nice. This is what you want your roots to look like when you pull your plants out of the pot. All right, so now that I've got this released from the pot, I'm going to go ahead and just stick my hands in the bale here and just kind of pull it apart a little. And if your bales are really tight, you can just reach in there and pull some straw out. And that'll help give you a little extra room to squeeze your plant into the bale. You may not have to do this. It depends on how tight your bales are. But that seems pretty good to me right there, so we'll give it a try. And I'm just going to gently open this up and work that tomato in. You can be somewhat forceful. Just try not to break the tomato stem itself. That looks pretty good right there. And I'm going to come back and take the straw that I pulled out and push it back down into the hole. Just like so. And now I'm going to squeeze the straw back in on the plant. Now, once I've got all these plants transplanted into the bales, I will come back and water them in. And guys, that's it. That's how simple it is to transplant your tomatoes into your straw bales. It really couldn't be easier. I mean, it's just an awesome way to go. So I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of these tomatoes put in, and we'll come back and see what everything looks like when we're done. All right, so I finally got all the tomatoes transplanted in, and just for your reference and of course my own reference too, because I always tend to forget what I've got planted where. Starting from this end and working our way down, the first two plants are German Johnson. And then we've got 2 Tiffin Mennonite, 2 Japanese Black Trifle, 2 San Marzano. Then over here, got 2 Wisconsin 55s, 2 Cherokee Purple, and 4 Italian Heirloom. As of this point, Italian Heirloom is definitely my favorite tomato. These things are incredible. They're large, they're meaty, they have a classic tomato taste, and they're sweet, almost like a cherry tomato. So it's the best of every world as far as tomatoes are concerned, in my opinion. So it looks good. We got everything in, and I really like how easy it was, and these tomatoes should do incredible in these bales this year. All right, we did it. We got all our transplants put in. All our tomatoes are in the bales now, and everything's looking pretty good. You know, just a note, when you transplant your tomatoes into the bales, they're probably going to look like hell for a few days. And that's just the normal transplant shock. So it's nothing to worry about. Make sure they're getting plenty of water, and just give them some time and they'll bounce right back. Another thing, you might notice that I didn't put any cherry tomato varieties in the bales. And that's not because they won't grow in the bales. It's because they grow almost too well. Cherry tomato varieties tend to just go crazy. And I found that they're easier to manage in a container in my bucket garden system. So I just left them out of the bales this year. The last few years I have grown tomato or cherry tomato varieties in the bales, and they just go absolutely insane, and I can't keep them pruned up enough. They grow so wild. So I omitted the cherry tomato varieties from the bales this year. I will be growing them in my tomato bucket gardening system. So we'll still definitely have our favorite cherry tomatoes this year. All right, guys, I hope this video helped you out and gave you some ideas on how to get your tomato plants in your bales. Hey, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you can follow along with the Brew City Garden for the rest of the season. And hey, if you got any value out of this, hey, give me a thumbs up, man. I appreciate that. It's going to help me out a ton. All right, make sure you stick around because there's so much more to come. Until next time, guys, we'll see you.